All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Welcome everyone to the last edition of Fridays on the Farm for March. I am really excited about our topic today. We are going to be chatting with Carolyn Lane. Carolyn has a lot of experience in the specialty organic grain marketing world, regionally, as well as working in some international markets. We'll do a little bit deeper discussion on some crops that I've had a lot of interest in, had a lot of questions about from growers we work with. We'll be talking about millet, emmer, and buckwheat. So with that, we'll just dive right in just a second here. I wanted to remind everybody the Organic Farm team and Dakota's Best sponsors this Fridays on the Farm series. My name is May Petrin, and I'm typically the host of these chats every other Friday. And you can check out all the recordings on YouTube of our Fridays on the Farm. But the Organic Farm team is just a powerhouse of different services and products relevant to growers in the regenerative and organic space here in the upper Midwest. And we are just excited to be a part of what you all do. So I just wanted to remind folks, we had a really fun time at our Organic Farm Team Summit earlier this month, and we will be having one in the fall, so look out for that. And here I just have a couple fun pictures of two different farmer panels we had during that summit, and I just wanted to remind everybody too, we will have recordings available free of charge to folks via our YouTube page. So if you just go to YouTube and look for Organic Farm Team, you will see all of those there. And with that, I will let Carolyn take over. Carolyn, go ahead.
130 years now. And so just a really great place to call home and have those roots and develop a real love of agriculture and farmers, since I was a kid. And from then on, I eventually went to college at University of Minnesota and degrees in agricultural education and international ag and sustainable ag. So that's always been just a love. And then in '99, I entered the organic field with working with Northland Organic Foods and a sister company, Northland Seed and Grain. And at that time, we were primarily exporting specialty food grade soybeans to Japan and Italy. And so I got real involved working with the University of Minnesota with the development of specialty food grade soybeans and wheat, and then getting some of these varieties approved for inscription and production in Europe. So we were doing a lot in Italy and Hungary, some in France, Spain, doing some work in Argentina and Chile with seed expansion. So the international side of it was so interesting at that point, and it was still a little bit more in the pioneering days. And then I moved to Ceres Organic Harvest for a couple of years, where that was pretty much all domestic wheat, so much more focus on wheat and durum markets. And then with recession, they ended up closing their doors, and we decided to start our own grain company, Natures Organic Grist. And that company was, we sold that in 2018. Our owner was just having major health problems and had to unload stress per doctor's orders. So then we got sold to Ceres Global Ag, kind of changed the scene. And hello, Craig. Good to see you here. Craig was a former coworker of mine at Northland Organic Foods, and so he might be also a good one to add in some comments as we go along. So my role with these companies was a lot on the buying side with the soybeans and wheat and developing those markets. With Nature's Organic Grist, we also got more into some of the specialty grains. At that time, we were doing quite a lot with millet and spelt and emmer and einkorn, developing some markets for those. And it's been so many changes over all these years. That's a little bit of what we'll talk about. Let's see, I think this would be a good time to do the screen share. And
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Okay, is that pulled up where everybody can see it now?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
I could see it on mine.
Okay, and I don't have any video clips.
Okay, there, I see it's coming.
Okay, all right. It's just a little slow or something, so. Okay. I thought I'd take just a minute and touch on some of what's happening with the markets. And like I was saying, this industry has just grown up so much just in the last 20 years that I've been involved with it. And this is a slide that there's a recent report that was put out by the Research Institute of Organic Agriculture. And this is on showing the growth in organic ag on a worldwide basis. And this was taken from data from 187 different countries as the end of 2019. So it's still not totally up to date, but that's what we have as far as on a global scale. And we can see here that as far as production goes, organic farmland is up to 72.3 million hectares, up 1.6% from 2018. And now there's 187 countries that have country with certified organic farming. And we now have 3.1 million organic farmers. That's up 13% from 2018. And the global market has grown to over 106 billion euros. So quite an increase. We can see that down here, the top 3 countries in the world as far as hectares is Australia, Argentina, and Spain. Now, Australia and Argentina both, most of that is in permanent pasture land. That's how they get all those acres for livestock. And I was a little surprised to see this. The number of producers in the top 3 countries were India, Uganda, and Ethiopia. A lot of those are smaller cooperative groups, so they're really involving a lot of small-scale farmers and opening up incredible new markets and improvements of life for those folks. So it was kind of surprising numbers, but interesting to see. As far as the markets, up here, the U.S. is still by far the largest with 44.7 billion euros, and with Germany and France coming in next. We're seeing a lot of increases in those European countries where they spend so much of their income on food, and they are willing to pay more for top quality organic food. So we see it down here too, the market shares of percentage that France, Denmark, again, are still the highest, with Denmark having the highest per capita spending.
Yeah, Carolyn, I'm glad you shared this kind of international perspective, because I think it's really easy to forget that sometimes with where we are. And to see the US being that far ahead in terms of spending is pretty shocking to me. I mean, I've kept good track of the domestic market, but to see that in comparison is just really interesting. I mean, I've been in this industry pretty knee deep for 4 years now, and I still am like, that much,
Yeah.
I remember sharing some information I found from Organic Trade Association that over 80% of American households have organic products in them now. And
Right.
that's a shocking statistic for some growers in our neck of the woods to hear too.
Right, and that's really increased with COVID too, with a lot of people kind of panic buying, but wanting high quality food. And so we saw a real spike in organic sales in 2020. But then you see that the percentage of land, I'm not sure where we rank globally. That'd be an interesting one to find out, but we definitely don't rank anywhere near the top as far as organic acres. But yet we have by far the highest demand in the world. And so we can see why that really does drive a lot of the need for imports. And that's been a whole nother area of controversy, because so much of the corn and soy are coming in from offshore. And those are crops that we do have a lot of capability to grow here. So that's a whole nother discussion. But we see with the global markets and us still having the lion's share of the demand, it creates some sort of some imbalances. But also it shows how much our pricing here is reflected by what's going on in the rest of the world. And like if there is a drought in Australia, that's going to affect global availability for the crops, especially wheat now that they're producing and livestock. And, we're very much tied in to what's going on with the rest of the world as far as who wants our crops and what they're willing to pay for it. So, and that'll probably continue to increase. This next slide here just shows a little bit more of what we were talking about with U.S. being the largest market, 44.7 billion euros, and the EU combined at 41.4. Again, this is just a little bit different graphic on what we were talking about with Denmark spending the highest amount per capita per person. It's interesting that these countries, I think Denmark is listed now as the highest, or Sweden, highest for happiness of their citizens too. And it kind of seems to reflect, what they're spending on food also. I don't know if there's a direct correlation, but I just thought that was kind of interesting. So, well, one of the questions that we have about, is if we're thinking about, we're already organic, and how do we develop these markets? How do we know what to grow? How do we know what pricing is going to be? Where do we find information? And I think I'm seeing that as over the years, as the organic markets are growing up, and there's a lot more push to almost to kind of commoditize them. We're seeing a lot more buying out by larger companies, buying up of smaller companies. The larger mills, instead of buying directly from farmers, they're either still buying from brokers who can aggregate large quantities and then sell for a little bit lower prices, or these mills are developing their own buying departments rather than going through a brokerage. And so then you start to lose a lot of those relationships that the smaller brokers are going to have with the farmers. And it was, for me, has always been, the greatest joy is getting to know the farmers, and you get to know the families, and a lot of these folks are known for 20 years, but that's kind of being pushed out as the whole markets are changing, and so it adds a little. There's a lot less transparency with pricing. I just thought I'd bring up these this is a price indication that USDA AMS gives, and but you can see on here, so much of these we'll have pricing for feed grade and a range, which is these are spot transactions or forward contracts, but almost all the crops they don't have enough information to even report it. And I forget how many sales they have to report a trend, but this is one big difference between organic and the conventional markets, is that the organic ones hold their cards a lot closer to their chest, and seem in general a lot less willing to share information on what the pricing is going to be. But yet this is still a helpful website to go to get some price indications, at least for corn and soybeans and a few others. Let's see, this one I was showing some of the breakdown they have with where the grower is delivering to the elevators, or in this case where the buyers are paying for the trucking. But we're not seeing it. There's a little bit on forward contracts we can see here on corn, but still not a lot. Macaris is another service that gathers information in a similar way. I have not used them myself, but some people do, feel they can get a lot more complete information with them. I think they've got a little greater reach. And what's your thought on Macaris, May? I think you've been working with them a little bit, haven't you?
Yeah, I've just been having some conversations with them. And one thing that I think is exciting, especially for the upper Midwest region, is they are hoping to do some farm gate pricing surveys on small grains. So this data, even though there's not enough of it for the USDA to be gathering it and reporting it, there are some parts of the private sector here that because they are also brokering and acting as a little bit of a trading service as well. So they do get some of that information, but they're telling me they're going to be aggressively serving growers for farm gate pricing for small grains, because not only has that been, just as volatile as the conventional side, but the spread between feed and food grade small grains, as you know very well, is tremendous. So that price premium is extremely sought after. But as far as, being able to tell a grower who calls me any given day a number, like, what are food grade oats going for? It changes,
Yeah.
and there's some folks in the room here too that I think know that well. But yeah, we'll see if folks like Mercara start gathering enough information to be helpful.
Yeah. So this is a starting place for some information on pricing indications anyway. I'm not really familiar with this, but I saw this is in the organic and non-GMO report. If anybody else has information on them, please chime in. But Merge Marketplace they're touting it as a platform for organic buyers and sellers to connect. Has been merged by Merge Organics. The consulting company helps farmers establish organic regenerative systems and field level transparency to organic food supply chains. And it says that you can list your crops, livestock, and land, and you create a producer profile. They're calling it like a Craigslist for organic products and buyers. There is a subscription. I don't know what it is. You have to sign up for the free trial. But just another platform. And occasionally we see something like this that does pop up that's trying to make it easier to connect producers and buyers more directly. Just curious, has anybody else looked into this yet?
I've been around their website, and it's very new. So there's not a lot of activity yet, but I think they also are offering some incentives for membership and things like that. So just something to consider. There's other organizations similar to this as well. So they're not the only game in town.
Right. And I'm not trying to advocate or promote them. I really don't know much about it. I just thought this was something interesting that's come up new. And this is certainly not the first one that's come up over the years. And I don't know how successful any of them really have been. Mercara started on a smaller scale like this too, and they've grown quite a bit. But so just watch for these. If you hear about them, maybe check around with others who maybe have used them and get get input. But just some other options for finding your markets too. I always find that the non-GMO organic and non-GMO report in their source book can be useful. And this right here is just a screenshot from their website. Let's see, I actually have one here. I don't know if I'm going to hold this up. And you can pick these up often at conferences, or they can send them to. The information is all free online. And you can, as a farmer, you can look in here and find who is buying your crops, and then contact them and see if they're offering contracts. But it's just a good way to find out who's buying what, and maybe as some of these niche markets tend to grow, who's actually buying them. So just one more resource. And then often I really enjoy their magazine, and it's online, or you can buy a subscription to it too. And a lot of times looking through who their advertisers are is a good way to find where the markets might be. But also, one thing was kind of interesting this year. Every year they'll have an article with a listing of grain buyers who are offering contracts to grow non-GMO and organic grains that year. And normally there's quite a few listed. This year I only saw 2 that were buying organic grains that they were actually listing here. They're not saying the contract prices, but it just seems that there's not quite as much forward contracting going on, just from other buyers that I've talked to. That it's just a little different market this year, and you never know. Every year is so different from year to year, but how much forward contracting goes on. But And who knows, maybe they just didn't get the communications out as much with buyers. I'm not sure why that list was so small, but
I think a lot of that is that they have a dedicated pool of growers they've been working with for a long time, and they go back to them. Because I've talked to a lot of growers who they have been, contracting with the same company for a long time. And, I've worked with brokers, same deal, they don't really like to have to switch suppliers and
right.
always work with new operations. So I think that could be part of it too.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, May, because most buyers do want to develop those longer term relationships. If you find farmers that year after year produce good quality crop and they're reasonable on settling with the price, and they have their deliver it, at right moistures and cleaned up, and that's really valuable to a buyer. And so you're right, and if they've got enough of those reliable farmers, then there's no need to be putting their name out there too much to solicit new growers. So yeah, good point. Well, just another thing I wanted to mention with some of these that's driving some of the markets too is we're seeing a lot more emphasis on local markets, and folks are looking for a lot more nutrient dense foods, and they're more concerned with food safety, especially with some of the food safety scares that we've been seeing, whether it's microorganisms or glyphosate, Roundup in the Cheerios or whatever. A lot of consumers are taking a closer look at what they're buying, and this has really a lot been driven by millennial parents too, who are looking for healthier foods for their children. This generation just seems to be a lot more aware of the food safety issues, and that's a good thing for us. And so this drive for more nutrient dense and higher degrees of food safety, being prepared to have healthy food on hand, those are all things that kind of converged in the last year to drive up some of the specialty crops that we'll be talking about a little bit too. May asked me to just throw in a little bit of information on several crops that we're seeing some interesting markets, and I'm going to be just open and saying I haven't worked with these a lot in this last year, so if anybody has some updated information, feel free to jump in. The first one she asked me to talk a little bit about is buckwheat, and growers often like that one because it's a good crop for soils that have marginal fertility, and so it's really good for building your soil health. And it's a shorter season crop, so you can often plant it late, and it's a little easier sometimes to help plan those rotations, and it can be a good cover crop and plow down for green manure. And there is some growing market demand for that. And a lot of that's being driven by export markets, which has been fairly traditional with that, but they're seeing also, even in the States, because it is gluten-free and it's a nutritional powerhouse, it's got a lot of benefits that it's being used more as a blend with certain products. And it's also good in livestock feed. So there's demand both for the human consumption as groats or in the hull and for feed. Like so many of these niche crops, there's some disadvantages, and especially that it needs special processing. And most processors aren't set up to dehull buckwheat. And since those markets are still limited, there's generally not too many buyers of larger quantities out there. The biggest one in our region is Mindat growers up in Grand Forks. And I talked with their buyer here recently, and she said they are full on their organic contracts for this year, but they are looking for more conventional ones or transitional. And even if you're an organic grower and they can't offer you a contract at this time, that still give them a call. They would like to know who's growing them. And the last 2 years have been really rough on the buckwheat market, or buckwheat crops. 2 years ago, we had all that early snow. And so, even come spring, about half the buckwheat crop was still out in the field, and they were able to recover a little bit of it. But that was just a tough year. And in 2020, then there was the early frost that knocked out a lot of it. So the buckwheat market in general has been pretty tight this season. And with the growing demand, there's a good chance you might be able to find a market for that one. The other big buyer is Burkett Mills out in Penn Yan, upstate New York. But that's a long ways to haul it. I don't know how far west that they contract. And domestic hauling in Madison, South Dakota buys some too. And they'll be looking for some, he said, but not as large of a market, but he does have the setup to do the buckwheat hulling there and is certified organic. And so not too many of those around. So those are just starting places. And, typically they have preferred that I not mention any pricing. And so that's not my goal. Call them. With all these crops, you need to do some homework and get on the phone, make the calls, and see who's interested and what they might be paying. And above all, getting your name out there to those potential buyers. So when they are looking for growers in the future, they'll have you in their database to call. And so that's other considerations too. Before you plant these crops, you generally want to find a contract, or at least know what some other alternative markets be, if there's some local markets, or if you have livestock that you can use them yourself. And also, when you're calling for contracts, find out what varieties they want, if they are variety specific. For example, Mindak has 3 buckwheat varieties that they particularly want, and they'll sell the seed on it. And generally, these will give some kind of a discount on seed if they're selling it. And but it's really disheartening to put a crop in and buy whatever seeds local, and then find out later, well, that variety just doesn't have much demand at all for one reason or the other. So, and then find out, when you're making these calls, what are their specs? With buckwheat, well, most grains, moisture is a big issue. And if it's got to be dried down, either they can't take it or there's going to be a discount to dry it. So find out exactly what the buyers need and what the qualities they want. And with buckwheat, like we already said, find out, is there actually a processor in your area, or would you have to haul it across the country to New York to find a potential market, which gets daunting when you're talking that kind of logistics. Just another thing I threw in with buckwheat. I know if you have volunteer buckwheat in your food grade wheat, it's a real pain to get out, and you're going to have extra processing costs for color sorting. Some simply won't take it if they don't have a color sorter, or they simply can't take it if it has buckwheat as a volunteer crop. So just another one of those little details. Does anybody else have any comments on buckwheat before we move forward?
I think part of the reason I've heard that, the supply has been so down, I mean, like you said, it was a little bit due to the weather. I've heard too, like, buckwheat doesn't like wet feet. And so, there's been such a big part of our region that it's just been too wet in the spring for something like this to be able to thrive. Do you kind of see that as well, Carolyn?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's always a good idea, if you're thinking about planting a crop that you've never tried before, to talk to some other farmers in your immediate area who may have grown it or tried it, and see what their experience is. And so if you're not repeating somebody else's bad experience, if it truly just isn't adapted to your region.
Well, before you move to the next slide, we do have a comment here in the chat box. Harry kind of doing a shout out for the Central Plains Organic Farmers Association, and also OFarm. So check out their website. It looks like if you want to be a part of their group, you can get some information on organic markets as well.
Right. Yeah, thanks for that. And I did have OFarm in my written notes here too, and I missed that. That's another option for looking for markets. If some folks, farmers say that they love the production side, but they hate the marketing side of it. And so then a marketing group like OFarm can be a real benefit and help with that. And I believe there's a fee for that service, but that's something you just need to ask questions and get all the details. But that's another option. And that's another thing too. Just all of the conferences, and those are such good places to find information, and talking with other farmers, talking with the buyers who show up at the organic conferences, and O-Farm would always have a booth there too, and where you can ask this information one-on-one, and even like this is a conference brochure. This is from Northern Plains Sustainable Ag Society. And they always put together a great booklet with all the different advertisers and exhibitors. So does the one in La Crosse, the Moses Organic Conference. So those can be great resources, just flipping through those and looking at the ads to find out who's buying what. But there's still nothing like going to the conferences and meeting with the buyers and other growers in person. Just wonderful resources, and also just such a good battery charger, because if you're trying to transition to organic on your own without a support group, it's really tough. But there's just a wonderful network, and a lot of times these conferences we say like family reunions, because the relationships with organic farmers really, I think, quite unique amongst other producers. So yeah, it's all good resources. Okay. And we were asked to speak just a little bit on millet. We're seeing some increasing markets for millet too. And a lot of that is being driven by the gluten-free demand. And, millet's been around for about 10,000 years actually, but it's kind of being brought to the forefront again because of its nutritional content, and it's higher protein than rice. Not quite as much as quinoa. Some are saying that millet could even replace quinoa as a superfood. It's not protein is the main thing. It's slightly lower than, but one real benefit is that it can be grown domestically, and whereas most of quinoa is still imported, and there's some issues around ethics even that a lot of the quinoa producing regions have exported the staple crop. And it's so expensive locally now that the people who have lived on it for thousands of years, that can't afford to buy it now. And I'm not sure how much that's actually affecting markets, but it is an ethical issue that kind of surrounds quinoa that kind of puts more favor towards millet as something we can grow very readily here in the United States, and then especially in the Plains area here. And it does fairly well on soils that have marginal fertility, and it can withstand some droughtier conditions too. So a little more flexible for especially like South Dakota. Like the others, it's one of the big disadvantages. It needs special processing equipment, which means there's not going to be as many processors out there that can handle it, and buyers. The largest ones in this region would be Bay State Milling in Sterling, Colorado. It used to be Clean Dirt Farm until a couple years ago. Montana Milling in Great Falls. And again, here in South Dakota, domestic culling by smaller amounts. There's probably others out there that I'm just not as familiar with. And if anybody else has some suggestions on that, feel free to chime in with those.
Carolyn, can I ask a question?
Of course.
What kind of millet are you talking? What species?
The biggest market has been for the white proso millet.
Okay.
Yeah, and there is some for, especially in birdseed, I believe, for the others, but the largest is the white proso. Is that what you're seeing too?
Well, that's what I thought you were talking, because I would assume that was market. The picture down below just kind of So I'll ask the question, since you put pearl millet in your presentation, is there any potential markets for pearl millet?
I'm not sure if that's more going into bird seed. You know more about than I do, Steve.
I'm thinking the human food. I think that there might be some interest, maybe on the artisan chefs type thing.
Okay.
We'll just leave it at that, because proso. Okay. I figured you were talking proso.
Yeah, right. And that's and I know some of the birdseed markets are buying others, but I don't know the specifics on them. Other than that's been really growing, especially for the exotic birds. And so,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
As a marketer of organic grains, I found the price just crazy for millet. I mean, it would. I retired as a full-time marketer in 2016, but prior to that, I would see fluctuations between 14 cents all the way up to, at one point, if we could find it, we could get 34, 35 cents a pound for it. And then because of the culture, we were encouraging some of our hard red winter wheat growers, our membership. I work for a cooperative, Central Plains Organic Farmers, and a lot of our farmers were in eastern Colorado, western Kansas, the Four Corners area there, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Kansas and Colorado, and it perfect for millet. And we would put it was a good working thing for the rotation of hard red winter wheat. You could go back and forth, but then the acres of millet. And then the other problem that we were finding was a lot of our farmers, because you have to cut it and then thrash it in a windrow to get it to harvest, it would stain. And then once it stains, its food market goes away. And we struggled for years. We'd ship a truckload to a dairy and they would try everything to get it into a feed grain way, because traditionally, particularly in the area I was talking about, millet was the go-to utility food crop. Farmers grew it and they fed it to everything, the chickens, the cows, and all that. And what our success came, kind of a moderate success, was in finding poultry operators, and they had to use a hammer mill type thing, could get it into a poultry ration. And once they started, the problem then was we wouldn't have years where we could have feed grade millet. And so, it's this thing of, you try to get a steadiness of, you've got a food market and a feed market, and get the bushels coming in a pretty uniform year to year way. Millet doesn't seem to adhere to that the way we're farming right now. I think it has a future, particularly as irrigated acres in our region become less likely to happen. You're going to need these drought tolerant crops, and millet's a perfect one.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for tuning in.
The other aspect was the storage. I've sold millet that was just perfect 4 years in a bin with very little maintenance done to it. It just seems like if it's put in the bin in good shape, at proper moisture, it's good to go for a long time. And it could just be that impervious shell that it's around it, the hull.
Harry, I'm really intrigued with you mentioning the poultry feed side of things, because if you kind of track the growth in the organic poultry production, it's been one of the most explosive growth points in the entire organic industry in the last 4 or 5 years. As a former organic inspector, I can attest to that. I did a lot of expedite inspections for new broiler operations. But I'm very intrigued by this aspect of, how much of their ration can you incorporate with millet, because, the poultry industry is what's driving a lot of our imports, especially of soy meal. So to replace that with some domestic production of millet is a powerful proposition, if we can get there. But I'd be curious about if there was any studies or any information available on who's done that.
Yeah, I could probably put you. We had one. He's in the very western part of Colorado. Has a poultry operation there that's been able to integrate millet into his, his feeding regimen. It's like, and dairy. I think dairy could do it. But it's sort of like the dilemma that we had years ago with using wheat as a feed grain for dairy. They just, the nutritionalists had said you can never exceed 20%, it's got to be corn or, Milo or something like that. Well, that was just a problem of sticking with a traditional nutrition, edict or something. Because once they applied themselves, looked at the grain, you found out that you could wet it, you could make it available, the cows would eat it. And I think we have the same dilemma with a lot of the minor grains as feed grains, just because they haven't been utilized and they haven't gotten the attention of the nutritionalists that have, put the time in to analyze how do we feed this grain. Because you look at like what Carolyn was saying, the nutrition curve is fantastic on millet. It should be a perfect. And there is a certain dominance of corn as the supreme feed grain, and nobody wants to go away from it. But that's not that's an unfortunate dilemma that we're in organic, because we can only grow corn once every 4 years or so if we're sticking with a good rotation plan.
And from what I understand too, millet is very highly digestible. And I know for humans, is that the same for livestock too?
Well, poultry would be a completely different answer, because, poultry, they don't like them to have very much fiber. And so that's been the issue with some other small grains applied there. I think the sticking point is going to be the same as in the conventional industry. It's the folks who are raising a lot of our organic poultry and our organic eggs. They're a contract producer, and it's not necessarily always up to them what's in their ration. So that's a whole other webinar.
Yeah. I just remember years back, I was having some almost like ulcer type conditions, and I was told to eat millet because it's so soothing and digestible. And yeah, it was wonderful. So that's what got me hooked on it years ago. So,
we have about 15 minutes left if you want to share a little bit about emmer, and we can wrap up.
Right. And, emmer has been one of my favorite crops, but it sure has been challenging. And Steve Swinger, if you want to pipe in on this too, because I know you've been wrestling with this too, and along with Blaine Schmaltz is the seed producer and grower. And it's such a wonderful grain. Farmers love it because it can get by with just, less than superb fertility. A lot of times it'll do better than a modern wheat. On marginal soils or when there's not as much moisture or with higher salinity soils. But one of the biggest things that's been driving it is that for a lot of people who have gluten intolerance, it can be eaten, depending on where they are on that scale of gluten intolerance, with a more of a simple genetic structure, and has a lower glycemic index, just a wonderful flavor profile. It's very rich and nuttier than other wheats, and very complex carbs. So you get the steady energy flow without the roller coaster. Very high in a lot of your other your B vitamins and your and lysine, essentially amino acid. But the hulling on it, the biggest disadvantage has been the hulling bottleneck, because it takes very specialized equipment, and each spikelet has 2 seed kernels in it, and one kernel is a little bit bigger than the smaller, so it's very hard to get a uniform dehull. And unlike a free threshing wheat that, as it goes through the combine, the glooms are all still on when emmer goes through, and it makes it great for storage in the bin. But it's a pain to get off, and you're going to have typically around 50% loss from the time it comes off to the combine to cleaning it and then removing the hull. And so if you can find somebody that can dehull it, you can't afford to haul it very far, just because 50% of that's going to be trash and clean out. So that's really been, for the last 15 years that we've been working with this crop, that's been the biggest impediment is the dehulling of it. We're seeing that most of the buyers that are doing well with it are smaller mills, and they're doing the production themselves, and then selling that incredible flour. They're milling it fresh and selling it locally. And then the other biggest impediment is what I call pseudo emmer. most of it originally was brought in from Italy, and we're seeing still a lot of Italian grain coming in that's marketed as farro. Well, farro actually is one of three different grains. Farro grande is spelt. Farro medio is emmer, which we would consider is considered true emmer or true farro in Italy, and then farro piccolo, which is einkorn. But rather than specifying, a lot of the sellers are just calling it farro, like that's its own unique grain. And it's typically spelt because that's the easiest and to grow and least expensive. So there's a lot of disinformation out there in the market about what is true emmer and what's farro. And most of the stuff that's being imported is significantly cheaper than our domestically grown true emmer triticum dicoccum. So that's been a real big issue in the marketing. And so many times we'll have some larger companies that'll experiment with it for a while, and then as well, can you beat the price of this imported? Well, we typically can't. Again, like I said, the ones that are doing really well are the ones that are growing it locally and milling it and selling it more locally. There's been a real boom in it for breweries. I think there's like 5 different distilleries that are using it now. Like in Germany, emmer beer is real popular, and we're starting to see East and West Coast more of the emmer beers, but also distilling it as whiskey. So, but again, those are going to be really small niche markets, and a lot of these breweries also like local production. It's great if you can, and then if you have some way to do it, to dehull it locally. At this point, the only one that I'm aware that's doing toll or custom dehulling is Stengels in Millbank, South Dakota. And they have the Farm Breeder Club through Northern Plains Sustainable Ag Society, their horn dehuller. It's a German model, but it takes a full week to hull a truckload. And so that doesn't make anyone any money. They do it basically just as a favor because they've been really faithful in trying to support us in developing these emmer markets. And but that's still the bottleneck. And but Blaine Schmaltz has been doing the seed multiplication and preservation over the years. And we were talking here yesterday, and he says, yeah, don't ever have to worry about Cargill calling me for emmer seed. It just doesn't fit the model of a larger producer and a company like that. And so that's a limitation we're having to kind of deal with, and reluctantly, but still an awesome grain. Steve, do you have anything that you want to add on that with your experience with emmer?
Yeah, I think you did, summarize everything I see on the end of as far as the agronomists working with the crop and stuff. And there has been, from what I see, expansion, but it's just what you said there. It's smaller mills, someone that was a startup operation, maybe and then grows and mills themselves, and that seems to be the most successful thing right now. I mean, you were kind of in the dream era of it when the semi-loads, you could buy semi-loads of it. That's not happening anymore, I don't think,
We would sell semi-loads occasionally.
Yeah.
That disappeared too.
But I think the crop has value. I mean, both emmer, einkorn, and spelt all do. I mean, I spent a lot of time on research on them. They have their value, but a lot of times, again, the lure of making a bunch of money in this miracle crop, they've been hung on that too much. And that's been a detriment, as it does with any crop, But I mean, they're so adapted, particularly the geographic area I'm in and where the sponsor for this is, that North South Dakota. I mean, that area, that South Central area of North and South Dakota is where emmer first came to this country, and that's where it was grown, and it still does well, I mean, in the same thing I'm still finding in particular, like we're really dry up here now too, and the same thing in the organic environment. Oh, when we get a dry year or adverse conditions, in the hull, the part coming off the field, it's going to yield wheat. We have to have, in organic environment in particular, we need, the high yielding ends for the wheat to surpass it in terms of pounds per acre. But yeah, but like I said, I like the crop, and I still think emmer probably has the best chance of all of them. I mean, spelt is there; it has an established market, but it's too close to wheat, I think, for lack of a better way to say it.
And we were doing a fair amount with einkorn for a while, but again, some of those bigger markets dried up, especially as the economy was so shaky. We had some pretty good research projects going on with some big companies, but then they pulled back. So I know they were going to have to just stick with ingredients that they were very familiar with, because anytime a manufacturer tries a new ingredient, it's a humongous financial risk for them, because right. To even just the packaging of it, even just changing one thing on the formulation, just a huge investment, and they're just not willing to take that risk right now with and well, the other thing I was going to mention that I think, emmer had first come to North America mainly used as a livestock feed. And the farmers I've talked to that have fed it to their dairy cows and their chickens, they absolutely love it. And the egg production was better. The milk yields, they get to tell the cattle and the chickens really thrived on it. And so if you want to grow it, and some are doing it just for their own home milling use, but also for livestock. And it makes decent hay too, from what I understand, if you have to take it down for weeds or something like that. So you gotta make sure you have a home one form or the other for it before you plant it, though. Yeah, and just to touch on einkorn, we've run into seed issues now, because again, so many of those markets kind of dried up, and so that those that were growing it basically stopped because the markets weren't consistent enough. There's a fair amount still going on in just across the border in Canada, and the primary grower grew up there. I asked them about getting some seed, and they thought about it, but they really want to keep that because they've worked so hard to develop that market and to purify that seed variety that they have. So we can buy the einkorn, but not buy the seed. And there's been a lot of calls for einkorn seed this year, and we just haven't really. And is there any more of TM23 available, Steve?
There's little bits and pieces some of the farmers have that's probably in the bin, unconditioned, and that type of stuff. Yeah.
Are you still doing any trialing at all with NDSU?
Yeah, I am. Kind of picked up the last couple of years a little bit more, and actually started evaluating some of the lines that have been released out of the Crop Development Center in Canada. So they're at least there's some pedigreed seed now, although you can't necessarily get that seed because not that it can't come across the border. It's just that they have very small quantities of the seed. But anyway, so with some newer varieties and stuff, and some of them are a little bit better.
Okay.
But in the last year, starting a year ago when the pandemic hit or whatever, for some reason, that early season, for some reason, the questions that came to me, as a researcher, and a lot of it's looking for seed or information. It's amazing how it just peaked,
Yes.
And I guess, is it panic type thing, what you're saying? I don't know, but there's been just a lot more interest. And again, will there be acres? Probably not, but there's a lot of people wanting to find some.
Right. And the main thing I'm seeing, also following a couple of the Facebook pages for einkorn, and einkorn is my favorite grain actually, is because people who have that gluten intolerance to a higher degree that maybe can't eat spelt or emmer even can eat einkorn. And that's been the biggest driver, and that higher protein and even higher nutritional quality. And so, yeah, Steve, I'd like to connect with you sometime here soon, because I've got some notes and some samples I'd actually like to get to you. So I've been wanting to do that for a long time. So yeah, we'll catch up later. So thanks so much for your input.
Well, to kind of start the discussion towards wrapping up, I just wanted to mention, I'm always actively looking at what's coming out in terms of grants to support the development of more small scale, specialized, custom grain cleaning operations. Because, when we were at the summit earlier this March, we were lucky enough to have Charlie Johnson from Madison pop in. And, one of his remarks really hit me home or hit me hard. he said, we produce over 70 semi-loads of organic grain every year, and not a single one of them stays in the state of South Dakota. So there's a huge opportunity, if you want to look at it that way. There's a huge opportunity in this region to develop that industry. It's just people have to be hungry for that kind of work. And, as someone who works with a seed company, and, we just struggle to keep up with existing demand to clean seed as an organic processor. So it's just it's a very specialized world, but I think just like the meat processing industry is seeing a lot of support coming from USDA and other government and NGO organizations, I think there's going to be support out there for folks who want to take that leap and expand some of these custom processing facilities. So that's just my own 2 cents here.
Okay, I think that's about all I had then, unless anybody else has questions, or unless we need to wrap up, May.
Okay. Yep. Go ahead and let me share my screen now if you want to escape out of yours. Thank you.
Yeah, one thing, it seems like there's a similarity with the growth of the perennial grain Kernza as a new possibility. It kind of follows the same thing as the emmer. It has real problems with processing. You right now with the current equipment that they have, there's, I don't know, it's something like, I've heard 16 to 40% loss in the dehulling and cleaning of the grain. But again, there seems to be enough interest that it's got some major players putting up some pretty good amounts of money on recruiting growers and getting a base of interest where you could get the quantities needed to launch it into the milling industry. And again, brewing is right now is the one place that you can sell about all the emmer, all of the Kernza you can grow. Seems to be whether that's a fad or if that's something that's sustainable into a growing market, you just have to see.
That's all good points, Harry. Yeah. We have a little bit of experience with Kernza too at Dakota's Best, and that processing component is a major challenge. And I saw a comment on social media the other day. People are always sharing that image of Jerry Glover from the Land Institute, next to the root system of Kernza because it's so compelling when you compare it to annual wheat. But my question remains, is the energy required to process it into actual human food going to counterbalance some of the ecological advantages there? So compelling discussions all around. We'll wrap it up today. Again, my name is May Petra, and please reach out to me anytime if you have questions about Fridays on the Farm, what we do with the organic farm team, if we can be a resource to you. We do post all of the recordings of these sessions on YouTube. I'm not promising they're very well edited and beautiful as some YouTube videos are out there, but the meat and potatoes are there for your consumption. And thanks everybody for joining us today. Really good conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Right.